Textbook definition of a military-style ambush is to lure into restricted corridors, draw into a cul-de-sac, and engage from a superior firing position with unprolonged fire. And some movie audiences may recall the description of Dealey Plaza in Oliver Stone's film JFK, where Jim Garrison, played by the actor Kevin Costner, and the assistant district attorney, portrayed by Michael Rooker, are in the Texas Book Depository with a rifle, discussing the Zapruder film footage and the 3 shots fired in 5.6 seconds. A job they believe Lee Harvey Oswald, as a medium shot at most, could not have accomplished alone, and which would have required 3 professional teams of hunters with a spotter and a sniper. And this may have been your very first introduction to the term triangulated fires in a turkey shoot. Hello, my name is Major Mike Wales, retired Army Ranger and a former biological warfare fighter, most recently described in one Texas court where I have decided divinely to intervene in the Navy SEALs litigation as a litigation hobby. I kind of like that term. But for the next few minutes, we are going to be discussing the current status of operations for this former Ranger Regiment legal specialist, in part relying upon this memorable scene at the Texas Book Depository in the Oliver Stone film, because as of today, we have actually managed in litigation a very rare opportunity, luring an invisible enemy, popularly known as a novel coronavirus, with an unknown zoonotic source into a restricted corridor to draw into a cul-de-sac for what amounts to a turkey shoot in litigation, to engage with unprolonged fire. And I don't know how many professional litigators who could have made that shot. Perhaps we just got lucky. As you may recall in the scene, Kevin Costner, or Jim Garrison, asked the assistant district attorney, Michael Cooley, why didn't Oswald just attack the motorcade coming down Houston? Because he had a clear shot. And it was his thought, at least in the movie, and stated very convincingly for movie audiences at least, who don't need to suspend reality, that even if Oswald had missed and the motorcade had sped up, he would still have other opportunities to engage the charges, which is something that a professional security officer would only do in a movie. You never try to just blow through the danger zone. Remember what happened to Queen Latifah in Set It Off, when there is an available opportunity to simply engage in what we like to call retrograde operations. What is the procedure? Come to a halt, lay down suppressive fire, and retreat along the safe route upon which you had arrived. Makes sense. They had that awkward turn ahead of them in clear sight that Donald Sutherland talked about. And if they were thinking, just blowing ahead would not be a reasonable option. Now, let me tell you exactly how this parallels with our current litigation, where we were in a position with a clear shot as the motorcade proceeded down Houston with a novel coronavirus, says the client, and where the client decided to speed right on through into the danger zone. In the military, we tend to be rather fond of phased operations with well-defined transition points, most often associated with a decision to be made, transforming that in your project management flowchart to a decision point. And even if you have not had the wonderful opportunity yet to be awarded your PMP certification or even Six Sigma certification, probably most Americans are now well acquainted post-pandemic with the flow of using terms like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Makes it sound like you have a plan. So let's begin by discussing phase 1 of our operation, as our shooter and spotter team moved into position on the evening of March 23rd, 2021. After being a little frustrated in efforts to prevail on the merits in litigations against the lockdowns as well as the non-medical grade facial coverings, because of what attorneys describe as regulatory deterrence. We were well aware that if we had the opportunity to engage head-to-head in a courtroom battle and trial about the evolving science of the pandemic, it would have been a slugfest, but for which we were rather well prepared to dig in. Perhaps a little too prepared, because all of our defendants decided to attempt to evade those confrontations, necessitating another approach to acquire the target. It's a good sign sometimes when your defendants run away. So we made the command decision to employ a targeting solution that would proceed along another route to achieve the same results, the Freedom of Information Act, or what is often called the FOIA. You ask the government for information, and unless there is some exemption from disclosure, they give it to you, generally. Having worked essentially as the Army top spy in a former life, I enjoy some familiarity with classified information and how it is handled. The paperwork, what makes it classified and not classified. And it appeared to me that some standard metrics for COVID-19 were being treated as if they were classified information. Sounds a lot like classified, paradoxically shrouded in mystery. So we decided to ask the stupid question as to whether or not these metrics were classified information or not. And at that time, we decided to display our badges and credentials, like police, to inform the White House that we were not on some wild fishing expedition, but had a very specific reason why this question was asked. Under Executive Order 12958, these metrics, specifically the infectious dose and secondary attack rate for COVID-19, could not be classified unless the causative biological agent for that disease, the novel coronavirus, was owned and controlled by the government, and hence would have had to have been cultivated or manipulated in a lab. And that was the first shot fired as the pandemic motorcade was coming down Houston, ramping up the vaccines rollout. And the White House acknowledged their receipt of the FOIA request immediately, and then slammed the shutters closed, as if they had learned that Frank Miller was arriving on the noon train to join with his old gang. We had Big Bird on the run, and the chase was underway. Now, rolling down Houston in the motorcade and receiving the first reports of fire, let's discuss some things where I, the president, I would not have done after somebody had flashed badges and credentials in my face and told me to halt like Stonewall. It didn't even work for Richard Nixon, if you recall, but especially after April 20th, 2020, when the deadline for the White House to respond with at least some type of answer, like a necessity for more time, perhaps, to reply, a valid and acceptable reason under the FOIA law. A series of diversionary tactics were employed, including FOIA submitted by the Washington Post and BuzzFeed to build a positive narrative that Tony was a really swell guy, under siege in a difficult situation, all of which produced thousands of pages of documents, while we could not obtain a response to a simple yes or no question as to whether the infectious dose and secondary attack rate for COVID-19 was classified information. But most critically, at the end of May, the Nixon White House did what the Nixon White House did during the Watergate scandal. The Biden administration decided to task the intelligence community, compromising their national security mission, to begin a wild goose chase for an answer that the White House, on all evidence, already knew the answer for, especially if the requested standard metrics on COVID-19 were classified information, causing them to shut down on March 23rd, 2021 in responding. But it will be very difficult, with more fatalities than Hitler caused in the Holocaust worldwide, for historians to note that the pandemic was not the third-rate burglary, but the cover-up that mattered. And had the White House decided not to blow down Houston and take that awkward curve in Dealey Plaza in March, there would only be 500,000 fatalities to explain, described by the president on the first anniversary of the pandemic as more deaths than in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined. Even before the arrival of the Delta variant, which had been described by the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, as the most contagious disease that she had ever seen in her 20 years of medical practice, albeit as just a medical research assistant and medical school professor. Now, at least according to the secondary attack rate for the original strain that had been determined by the WHO, After properly examining 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases and a trace contacts by February 2020, 19 times more examined cases than were present in the entire nation when Virginia Governor Ralph Northam made the decision to lock down. COVID-19 had a secondary attack rate of less than 5%, which is 4 times too low to validate a disease being transmitted from person to person, and 12 times too low to set off a super spreader event. A number and metric that the CDC does not publish, state, or use for whatever reason. And if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. But piss poor planning yields piss poor results, and this virus has fooled us before. Has claimed over 1 million American lives. And I have COVID-19 running away from me.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.